All right, so we're going to get started with Katlin. And Katlin, we were introduced several months ago, and I was so impressed with your experience level working with seniors, especially being that you're probably one of the youngest ones in this room right now. But that has nothing to do with her knowledge level, because her knowledge level is amazing. So let's start by talking about your background in social work and how you came to see the critical nature for families and individuals to both not only discuss, but also record their wishes.
That's great. So I'm Katlin again. I have been practicing social work for about 10 years, which for me feels like a really long time. But I started my career actually at Bethany Christian Services. I worked with vulnerable children and families in the foster care system. And during my time in that role, I got very comfortable having extremely challenging and somewhat tumultuous conversations with families who did not want to talk about certain topics. And I found that I had somewhat of a knack for hard conversations and didn't mind really digging into those conversations with my clients. Fast forward to 6 years after that, I started with Brio Living Services, or Porter Hills, and found myself working with a totally different population, working with older adults. And I found that conversations about end-of-life planning or conversations about end-of-life goals and wishes started coming up in almost every meeting that I was having with people. And so I was learning so much about advanced directives and patient advocates and what a DNR means and how do I make sure that my wishes are communicated to my loved ones, to my family. And so I actually decided I'm going to do a little test and I'm going to ask my grandparents some of these questions. I was having dinner with them one day and I asked them, I am learning about all of this stuff. I would actually really, for educational purposes, love to hear about what your wishes are. What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are your desires for maybe your last stage of life? And things got really quiet, and I felt just this emotional shift in the conversation. I also love my grandparents a lot, so I spend a lot of time with them. But I felt this shift in the conversation, and my grandma looked at me and said, "Kate, no one's ever asked us this. We have no idea. I don't know." And then she said to me, "But I think about this all the time, and I worry about it, and yet no one's asked." And then we launched into this beautiful conversation about, well, let's talk about it now, and then let's talk with your kids, my parents, about what those wishes are and how can we make sure that those are honored as you're aging. But that was really eye-opening for me that even my own family had not sat down or had not asked the hard questions of my grandparents, and yet my grandma had been thinking about it for years and just didn't know where to start and didn't know how to start that conversation.
Yeah, that is so powerful when we go back to our own families, because I know all that I've learned in the last few years, and I can tell you in no uncertain terms that our personal families don't have all these things done that I talk about all the time, because they're much harder to do than to talk about. And it is a constant, just a constant goal to get these things done.
Yeah.
So you have a special designation as what's called an advanced care planning facilitator. So tell us more about what that is and how you use that knowledge when you talk to people about their futures.
I do. So, after that conversation with my grandparents and then recognizing that this conversation is coming up a lot in my role or in my job, I actually got, certified as an advanced care planning facilitator. And that means a few different things. It means that I'm trained to help facilitate conversations about end of life, but also about figuring out this big piece that a lot of us maybe don't know much about, which is your patient advocate or your durable power of attorney of health. So first and foremost, sometimes my role means education, and helping people understand, well, what is the role of the patient advocate? There's a lot of misconceptions about this role. A lot of times people think my patient advocate is there to make decisions for me. They're there to make decisions for me if I can't make decisions or if I can't communicate. Well, that's partially correct. Really what their job is to communicate your wishes. They shouldn't be making any decisions really on their own. The role of the patient advocate should be that you are talking with them well in advance about what you want. What you want for your medical wishes as you age, what you want for your care plan, where you want to live, do you want a DNR, what measures do you want? So they really are just meant to be your voice if you are unable to speak and to share your own wishes. So that's a lot of times what I'm doing is education on what is that role. The second thing I'm oftentimes doing is helping people decide who to choose as their patient advocate. And I think there's a question about that later. We'll go a little bit more in depth. I think a lot of people oftentimes think the best person to choose for my patient advocate is my firstborn child. That is not always the case. It's not. And so a lot of what I'm doing too is education on who to pick and why to pick that person. And then finally, a big part of this role as a facilitator is helping you communicate your wishes. Just because you choose a patient advocate, someone to be your representative, that does not mean that they know what your wishes are. If you do not tell them, they don't know. Even if you write down a few things on your patient advocate form, they don't always know what your goals and wishes are as you age. So part of my job is sitting with my clients and their families and talking about the future, talking about general themes of aging, and really helping make sure that your wishes are communicated and your wishes are known.
So let's dig into that question a little bit so with choosing a patient advocate and making sure that you're not just going to kind of that obvious choice of the oldest child, what are some of the most important things that a person should consider when they're choosing an advocate, and why are close family members not always the best option?
That's a great question, and maybe a controversial question. Things that I encourage people to consider when you're choosing your patient advocate would be, first and foremost, willingness. Is the person that you're choosing actually willing to communicate your wishes, or are they going to communicate and choose their own wishes for you? So an example of this would be if you choose an adult child and you say to your adult child, I don't want extreme measures at the end of my life. I don't want to be on a ventilator. I don't want to be in a hospital. I don't want to be in a nursing home. Choose someone that's going to honor that, because I have seen so many cases with my own clients where an adult child chooses something different than I know that their parent actually wants. So the first thing is willingness. Are they willing to honor your wishes, and are they going to follow your wishes? Another thing I encourage people to consider is proximity and availability. So is your patient advocate someone who is going to be available when you need them? I'll give an example of this. I was working with a gal once who we were talking about her patient advocate, who was her son, and I quickly realized that her son travels out of the country for work almost 2 weeks out of each month. And so I said to her, when the time comes that you need your son to fulfill this role, is he going to be available? Will I be able to get in touch with him? Will a hospital be able to get in touch with him? And she said, no, you won't be able to. And so we had this great conversation about, you might want to pick someone else, someone who you know will be available if something catastrophic were to happen and you were in the hospital. Who is the hospital calling? And if they can't get in touch with that person, that could be problematic. Another big conversation I have with people is, family is not necessarily always the best choice for this role. It doesn't have to be family. I was working with another resident of mine a few years ago, and she had a chronic illness, and she was kind of nearing her end stage of life, and I was meeting with her, and I said to her, where and how is your daughter feeling about all of this? Her daughter was her patient advocate. And she said to me, my daughter can't have this conversation with me. I want to slow down. I don't want any more extreme measures. I want to be at peace, and I'm really ready for end of life. And she said to me, my daughter, every time I bring this up, she can't even hear it. She just can't have the conversation. And I offered, could we sit down together? Could I help facilitate that? And she said, she's just not willing. And fast forward a few months later, this woman actually had a stroke, and she was in the hospital, and she wasn't able to verbalize her wishes anymore. And I got a call from her daughter who said to me, she was just so upset, and she said to me, I have no idea what my mom wants. I've never taken the time to ask because it was too hard for me. And now I'm sitting here devastated because I don't know how to answer any of the questions that the hospital is asking of me. And so choose someone who is willing to engage in some of these hard conversations with you. It doesn't have to be family. Choose someone that you know will hear you and be willing to sit with you through some of these really hard times.
That is absolutely huge. And then in terms of that distinction between, we all talk about how much we think about these things, but not only recording our wishes, maybe we have recorded our wishes with an estate attorney, but what about the distinction of actually communicating them to the proper people so that they can carry them out?
That's a great question too. So you might have your documents completed, right? You might have a durable power of attorney for health. You might have a living will. You might have a patient advocate. Those are all really essential and really important, but you cannot record every possible scenario that could happen in the future medically. There is just no possible way to do that. It would maybe be a 500-page document. Nancy's shaking her head, yes. It would be like a 1,000-page document. You can't record it all. So the conversation piece, in addition to the document piece, is so essential because a document can't always capture general themes of what you want. It can't always capture, where do you want to age? Do you want to age at home? What is that going to look like? Do you want to be on hospice? When would you be ready for that? Who do you want to care for you? Some of those things are just so important to talk about, and yet you can't always capture them in just one document. The other piece of recording your wishes versus communicating your wishes, you need to communicate probably many different times on this topic, right? A lot of people set their patient advocate up maybe in their 60s, early 70s, sometimes in their 50s, which is great and proactive. But what you want when you're in your 60s is very different than what you want in your 80s or 90s. And what I've seen with some of my clients is they're 90 years old and they pull out this patient advocate from 30 years ago and they're dusting it off and reading through it and saying, gosh, none of this is applicable anymore. I don't want any of this. I want something different. And so the conversation piece, in addition to the document piece, is so important. Revisit this often. Revisit it every year. Have conversations. Think about it. Talk with your doctor about it even. Talk with the people that you trust because your wishes might change. And we want to make sure that those are able to be honored.
One of the attorneys that had spoken a while ago talked about this idea of make a date with yourself on your birthday or shortly around your birthday to review all of your important estate documents, all of your important wishes, just a reminder to be, re-looking at all these things that are so very, very important. So, Katlin, can you give the audience some pointers on the best way to initiate these really somewhat uncomfortable but yet essential conversations?
Does anyone have a social worker in their family? Anyone? Okay, gravitate towards that person. They're going to talk with you about it. Or a nurse, they're going to talk with you about it too. My suggestion with these conversations is start early and start small. This does not have to be a big, scary, end-of-life conversation that you have over a very intense dinner one day with your family or your friend or whoever is your representative. Start early, start small, do it consistently. It does not have to just be about death and dying. It's also about how do I want to live? How do I want this stage of life to be? How do I want to be supported? It's important to just, really start those early. And then having those conversations regularly and revisiting those over time is really helpful. If you don't have a social worker or a nurse in the family, use online resources to help with this conversation. There are some really great guides online. I sent one to Laura recently that help you facilitate this conversation with your family, that make suggestions on general themes to touch on or various aging-related questions that you should be thinking about yourself and then be talking with your loved ones about. Use those resources. This can be a hard and emotional conversation. Does it have to be? No, but it can be. It can be for your kids, for your family, and like the story I shared earlier, your loved ones may not always be, this might not be an easy thing for them either. So start small, be consistent, use online resources to help guide you as you're talking about these things.
A little wine might help as well.
Yeah, maybe have a glass of wine as you go. That sounds nice.
Or hot tea, whichever.
Or hot tea.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the Vial of Life and other tools that you've seen used by seniors that have worked really well to make sure that their preferences are followed during an emergency or other unplanned event.
Sure, so life is so unpredictable and unprecedented. I think a lot of us know that. Should you find yourself in a crisis or an emergency and you're at home and EMS is called to the home, there are some great tools that you can use to make sure that your wishes are honored and communicated to folks like EMS, emergency personnel, the hospital, etc. So one of those that I love to talk with people about is called Vial of Life. Has anyone ever heard of Vial of Life before? Yes.
And that is attached as an attachment to your handout. So it's the last page of your handout today. So
great. Vial of Life is a really common concept for EMS or emergency personnel. The idea with Vial of Life is you have a little decal that goes on your front door of your home or in a window. And as emergency personnel are coming to your home and they see that, they know to go directly to your refrigerator when they get inside your home. And on your refrigerator would be a Ziploc bag with the Vial of Life decal. Inside of that bag is important information. On your, I think one of the things Laura provided to you is a cover page from Vial of Life where you could put things like, what medications am I taking? Who is my emergency contact? Who are my medical providers? Do I have a DNR? Also in that Vial of Life bag, you can put your DNR. You can put a copy of your patient advocate. You can put copies of other important things because if you are by yourself, you call 911, you may not be in a frame of mind or state of mind to be communicating all of these things to the right people. And so EMS would grab that bag and bring it with you to the hospital essentially so that the right people have the right information. Another thing I really encourage people is make sure your doctors have copies of your advance directives. People miss this all the time. If you have a patient advocate form or a durable power of attorney for health, your doctor needs a copy or else they don't know. And if you don't carry it on you, they might just not know and not have it. So make sure the right people have the right documents. Also huge, make sure the person you've identified as your patient advocate has a copy because they will be asked to provide proof of that to, hospital personnel or a doctor. So make sure that they have access to a copy of that as well. These are just important things. Prepare your patient advocate correctly. Make sure that they are well equipped and well set up to communicate your wishes and ready to step in if need be. One last thing that people sometimes use is people also consider things like a DNR bracelet. DNR is a big one that I find people are just so, they want that honored, which I can absolutely understand. So consider, even if you are serious about your DNR, get a bracelet for that. Because if you're in public and you fall over or you're having a heart attack, etc., and you don't want to be resuscitated, that bracelet is a notifier to emergency personnel of what your wishes are. So it's important to communicate. I worked with a lady once who was 101, Laura, and she didn't have a vial of life, but what she did was she printed out her DNR and had it taped to her front door, to every surface in the home, the fridge, by her bedside, in every window. So you walked into the home and there was a DNR everywhere. And although I suggested a vial of life, she said, no, this is working for me. So you do what works for you, but make sure, my priority for the people I'm working with is I want nothing more than for your wishes to be honored, but you have to play an active role in that. You have to also be willing to engage in those conversations and to equip others to support you.
Katlin, that was awesome information. One other thing that would go along with that is for those of you who travel, make sure that a copy of the vial of life or something very similar is in your car or goes with you, because that can be critical if you are somewhere else and people don't know you, and that can be very devastating. So awesome. And we'll have more questions, time for questions, because I'm sure you'll have questions on this. So